It's exciting for me to be here. I'm not from Australia. I'm not from New Zealand. I'm from the United States. And I want to talk to you about GLP-1 drugs, but I want to start just by pointing out that in many ways, our food system, it's a miracle and a disaster. I think we've heard a little bit about the miracle aspect this morning. I know I was excited about hearing about all of the opportunity that agriculture presents. But when it comes to obesity, I think most of us would agree that it is a disaster. Nearly 1 billion people, 1 in 8 people on the planet, are living with obesity today. I come from the United States. 42% of all Americans are obese. 75% are overweight or obese. It's on its way to 50% by 2030 if we don't do something about it. In 2019, I decided to do some research on this topic, and I wrote a book, Why Smart People Make Bad Food Choices. You probably haven't read it. Nobody else did. At least for me, though, I had this question. How can obesity be so bad when we've never known more about health and nutrition in the history of the planet? We've never had better nutrition labels on our food. We've never had better labeling and menus in our restaurants. We've never had more food choices that were healthy in a grocery store. We've never had better dietary guidance. By every measure, things should be better, and of course, they're wildly worse. And this is what I tackled in the book. And I was wondering about it, and it's not just a problem, though, in the United States. This is a global challenge. Now, the US may be number one in this. It's nothing to be proud of, but every country in the world is following behind us. According to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, the cost of our food system to the global economy is $10 to $12 trillion. The cost to the US food system is $1 to $2 trillion. And most of that is diet-related illnesses. So it's not just a human disaster, but it's a financial disaster as well. And so one of the questions I had, though, is how did we get here? How did we get to the point where things are so bad? Because you may think, well, the United States, that's just America. It's a place where they have a problem like that. But if we went back to 1970, obesity rates in the United States were lower than most of Europe. This is a problem that has completely arisen in just the last 50 years. And every country will follow in the path of the United States if something doesn't happen. So in the book, I talked about 3 scenarios for the future of food. Scenario 1, we all have an app on our phone that tells us what we can and can't eat. So by 2050, these scenarios are imagining we've solved the problem. So we have this app that tells us what we can and can't eat. At my house, we call this my wife, and it's fairly effective, but it's hard to scale. Scenario 2, we all take a pill, and we magically lose weight. And then scenario 3, we eat whatever we want, and nobody gains weight. Now, you might imagine that scenario 3 is impossible, but of course, that's the world we lived in 1960. We were cooking with lard, and nobody was obese. And that's because our food system didn't deliver obesity. And so I argued that we should reshape our food system, we should regain our joy in food, and we should all live happily ever after. Americans chose the pill. So apparently the pill is the way to go. So despite the fact that it's not really the way I would argue, it's the way we seem to be going. So for those who don't know, these GLP-1 drugs, weight loss drugs, but they're not just drugs that suppress appetite. They're drugs that shift how we think about how we consume food. So everything changes when you take these drugs. With most diets, they don't last. By the end of a year, most people have regained the weight. But as long as you stay on the drugs, you do lose the weight and you keep it off. The average person who takes these medications loses 20% of their body weight. That's a lot, and they keep it off, though there is a rebound when they stop taking the medication. And people are choosing to buy these drugs, and in the United States, it's incredibly expensive, particularly those who are not doing it for medical reasons. And so Many of the people that are doing it are not pre-diabetic. They're doing it to maintain a weight or to lose weight for more aesthetic reasons, and they're paying tens of thousands of dollars for this. And what's remarkable is the government isn't asking them to do it. Policy isn't driving them to do it. There's a huge cost to doing it. And side effects include projectile vomiting. Now, when you have that kind of a side effect with that kind of a cost, you might expect that uptake would be rather slow and limited. About 10% of all Americans are on these drugs or have taken these drugs. And the numbers would be dramatically higher if they were affordable and accessible. In fact, let's imagine for a moment that they were affordable and accessible. Remember, I said 42% of all Americans are obese, 75% are overweight or obese. It's easy to imagine half of all Americans taking these medications. And if half of Americans took the medication, and this is why it's important to everybody involved in agriculture, that alone would lead to a 10% reduction in all the calories consumed in America. America would eat 10% less food. And if we ate 10% less food, we would buy 10% less food. In fact, we would buy 13% less food, or 15%, because we wouldn't have any food waste. So now we're up to 10 or 15% of food production doesn't need to happen. But of course, when you take these medications, you don't just change the food of the people that eat, you change what the children in the household eat. You change what the spouse eats. You change what everybody in the house eats. So the impact on our food consumption could reduce food intake by 10, 15, 20%. It is hard to imagine any other single intervention that the consumers would demand that could have a bigger impact on our food system. And it's not just about nutrition and health. That would be a 20% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions from the agriculture sector. That'd be like 5% of all the emissions from the United States reduced because Americans chose to do it and decided to pay for that intervention themselves. And so we have half a dozen products in the pipeline so that you don't have to take a shot. You might be able to take a pill. You might bring these costs down. So you should expect dramatic changes in the landscape in the years ahead. And these products are coming to New Zealand. They're coming to Australia. They're coming to the UK. They're coming to every part of the world. And they will have an impact not just on the consumer, not just on the food companies, but on the agriculture system, the ingredient suppliers, on everyone. The amount of consumption or the amount of groceries is reduced by 5 to 10% in these households. Sugary snacks are reduced by 11%. So again, you eat more nutrient-dense food, you eat more vegetables, you shift the kinds of protein that you consume. Less beef, more poultry, though you do and need to eat more protein. So the conversation that we're going to have is about what does a GLP world look like? And one of the things I want you to keep in mind is that the impact this will have on the food system is greater than the impact that climate change will have on the food system over the next few years. It will have an enormous impact, and so companies, farmers, producers, organizations should all be thinking about, what does this mean for me? What does it mean for my family, for my business, for my country? Because there is no single intervention that consumers will demand that could have a bigger impact. And so with that, I'd like to invite my fellow panelists to come and join me on the stage. We have Adam Anders, who will moderate this session. We have Georgie Ailey. We have Michelle Colgrave. Please.
Thank you very much, Jack. Welcome to the stage, Michelle and Georgie, and looking forward to this discussion. There's already some controversial statements having been thrown out by Jack, and I think we should check the temperature with our panel before we go any further. I already know that this panel believes that our food value chain is broken, so we're not going to go into that. We're going to jump straight into anti-obesity drugs. And I thought to set the stage, I might start with a fad or force question for this panel, right? So weight loss drugs, a fad or a force? I think we know where you sit, Jack. Michelle, fad or force?
I'd like to say fad.
Okay, I like it. Georgie?
I think from an Australian context, we're still fad, but I think that shift into force is coming more rapidly than we might predict.
And Jack, you're a double down force, I suspect.
It is a force of nature.
Okay. And then if we move into what these drugs are doing, I just want to get, now this is a values statement that we're going to dive into here. So weight loss drugs are fundamentally wrong. The idea that we're bracing ourselves to drug out of an obese malnutrition problem. Now, Jack, you can believe it's a force and still disagree with the philosophy of what's going on here. So we'll kick off with you. Are weight loss drugs fundamentally wrong? Just yes or no first.
No.
No. Georgie?
No.
I'm going to have to say no.
No. Okay, fine. So we don't have anyone who's actually anti the idea of drugging our way out of this problem, but fair enough. I think someone in the audience is going to disagree with you, but you know, unanimous is unanimous. We move on.
What's your answer?
Beg your pardon?
What's your answer?
My answer is that this is absolutely wrong, right? I mean, you know, we've got a food system that's built on over-drugging the fields and then expecting a healthy outcome from soil and the output. We've got a health system that's all about drugging ourselves and eating badly. And now we're going to get out of that problem by drugging ourselves? I mean, no, I think it's a disgrace, actually. So I'm glad you asked, but just to give my answer.
What do you really think, Adam?
I think it was a yes or no answer, and you were allowed to embellish a lot more than you allowed us.
I'm moderating, Michelle.
Let us embellish.
Unfortunately, we've each got a microphone, but I think I'm in charge of the pen at least. And so I'm going to push one more boundary because something that Jack said also pushed a really important point. So, Jack, I already know your answer to this one, and that is that anti-obesity drugs are going to have a bigger impact on our food system than climate change. It's a massive statement, everyone. Georgie?
I'd probably say no.
Okay. Michelle?
I'm going to go no on that one too.
No. Okay. So the climate change question is out. Okay. So let's dig in a little bit further as to what we're actually talking about here. We are lucky enough to have a professor from the CSIRO, responsible for agriculture and food, very well qualified to actually go one level deeper on what these drugs are actually doing, please. Let's just make sure we've got a common base here for the audience.
Yeah, so we're talking about a peptide hormone, essentially, something that most mammals make and humans certainly make. The drugs that are being taken are a slightly modified version of what exists naturally. They've been modified to make them stable and resist digestion so that they have a longer half-life and can deliver those benefits around satiety and slowing gastric emptying, and those effects are what lead to some of those side effects, the projectile vomiting, the diarrhea, the constipation, all the fun stuff that you get when you take these medications, especially when you begin the doses. What these peptides do is they bind to receptors that then cause that downstream effect. But our bodies themselves produce a number of these peptide hormones, and they are the balancing act. So there's things like ghrelin, or you may have heard as the hunger hormone, the thing that makes you hungry, and right before lunch you probably got a bit of it going around in your body now. But then you also have these peptides that then induce satiety, and that's what we're talking about in this case.
Okay, and so we've already heard about the side effect of projectile vomiting. I think you're supposed to moderate your dose down so that that's not the given case day in, day out. What are the other side effects?
or you name it, there's all sorts of side effects. So as I said, constipation, diarrhea, the vomiting, gastric symptoms. But then others also report fatigue, chronic fatigue in particular. And that, it's not clear on why all of these symptoms are arising. Sometimes it can be due to the fact that you have less energy just from the reduced consumption. And then there could be longer term effects in terms of if you're not consuming as much, then you may not be consuming, say, as much protein and amino acids. That can lead to muscle loss if you're not actually thinking about the food that you're consuming while on the medications.
Got it. And the muscle loss is because your body basically starts eating the muscle when you don't have enough available useful calories or useful nutrition?
Yeah, and look, there's micronutrients that you have to consider in your diet as well as the macronutrients.
Yep.
But if you look at our aging populations in particular, we already have sarcopenia or muscle loss. And so we have to make sure that if you're on these medications that you are getting the right nutrition at the same time. And that's where food manufacturers in particular will have to lean into it.
Very good. Okay, so I think we've got a common base as to what's going on here. You're not exactly selling the fact that this is a force for good. We are going to come back to where the benefits are then. But before we do that, we've heard about 10% of the American population already using these drugs. We know that they're above $1,000 a month. Where are the numbers in Australia?
Look, it's a really interesting question, Adam. The numbers are actually really hard to define for Australia. And the numbers that we do see are anywhere from 20,000 users per month or prescriptions per month. And that's the Australian government's current statistic. But what we have seen as well is through the PBS, about 120,000 scripts a month, noting that a large percentage of those users would be taking the drug more for the diabetic treatment versus the weight loss treatment through the PBS program. And numbers right up to 250,000. So if you sort of see that as a percentage of the Australian population, we're probably talking about 1%.
Okay, so we're quite a distance behind. Is it a growing, first of all, is it an accelerating usage at the moment?
It is an accelerating usage.
Accelerating usage.
Yeah.
Is it an accelerating topic of discussion in food in Australia at the moment?
Look, I'd say it's still nascent. So if I talk from the food industry's perspective and a lot of the clients that I work with across the food value chain, it's I guess a trend or a fad that they're sort of watching from a insights and trends perspective that shapes a lot of their strategic agenda or how they think around product innovation and their broader product portfolio. But we're not seeing the same level of conversation, I think Jack would attest, is happening in the US. And so I think there's still a level of consideration for the Australian food industry around how do we keep monitoring use and looking at that uptake and changing consumer behaviour in Australia and start to think about how will that shape our longer term product portfolio.
Okay. And so Jack, we're going to jump back in, right? Michelle didn't exactly sell the dream on why this is great, let alone how it's going to struggle to actually have a bigger impact than climate change for good, I hope we were talking about, with the list of side effects that Michelle is going for. Why don't you elaborate a little bit more on your thesis of the big positive change coming from the body of anti-obesity drugs that are in the market?
So I mean, I'm not necessarily an advocate for them. I'm just looking ahead and commenting on sort of what I see coming. And clearly the people that are taking the medications feel like all of the negatives, it's all worth it for them. And there are two groups of people that are taking the medication. There are those who are pre-diabetic or diabetic who are taking it for medical reasons. It's been prescribed for them. And there are pretty strong associations that there are positive health outcomes for those individuals. So less risk of heart disease and all sorts of diseases. So there are potential side effects that we don't know about that could be problems, but there are a lot of confirmed positive health outcomes associated with reducing this weight. And then for others, the balance of being able to lose the weight and keep it off is also a positive. I think it's worth keeping in mind that in the United States, Americans already spend $160 billion a year on weight loss control for things that don't work.
Yeah.
And this is something that actually delivers on its promise. And so I'm not sure that it's fair to compare or to try to analyze whether it's good or bad in isolation, when the other things that people are trying aren't working for them, and they're just yo-yoing from one diet fad to another, which is clearly not a good thing either. In terms of its impact on climate, well, if you reduce by 10 or 20% the calories consumed, you will have that kind of an impact on greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, it's inevitable. And it is very hard to shift what people eat. We can say that we want to reduce the cost of the food system, and we want to reduce emissions, but none of the interventions we've discussed so far today could reduce by 5% the greenhouse gas emissions of the ag sector of Australia in the next 5 years.
Yep, fair enough. I thought there was a substantial amount of literature saying that if you go off the drugs, within 18 months, you're back to your previous weight. That is already a study that's over a year ago. There were a lot of studies over a year ago. What's the latest news there?
Yeah, and Georgie will probably have some comments here too, that certainly there's a rebound, people that go off, but part of that's that they live in the food environment in which, they gain the weight in the first place. And so unless you do something during the time you're on the medication to reshape your food environment, it will be difficult to stay off it. But you have a whole range of companies that are stepping up to try to prepare for the off-ramp.
Yep.
To not only to help you manage reducing it, but to actually help you to maintain. And so, there's $160 billion they're going to lose on the diet side. So they're shifting that to creating opportunity to try to help people stay off of, keep from regaining the weight. And obviously, hopefully, some of these other drugs will have less of an impact and will contribute to that as well. But you might have some thoughts.
Yeah, it's really interesting how, I guess, the food industry is responding. And I think to Jack's numbers, I mean, what we sort of see numbers-wise is about a $48 billion projection that we'll see a reduction in spend. Now, they're US numbers and what we're seeing out of the US. But I think more interestingly is a $190 billion food and beverage market opportunity. So I think for food companies really looking at this more at maybe a force than a fad, to Jack's point, there's a large market.
And what products can we expect coming into the market in that regard?
So, and I know Michelle will have a view on this. I mean, this is really that lens around precision nutrition and how do we start to see the reformulation of products to address, I guess, some of the protein challenges, the fibre demands, that changing nutritional profile that consumers are seeking if they do re-engineer their behaviours while they're on the drug. So there's a lot of products focused on those that are taking the drug, and then to Jack's point, as they start to, I guess, ramp down and transition back into more everyday. So we're seeing things like same product but a smaller serving size. So how do you deal with the reduction in appetite? We're seeing things like reformulation, new product development to change the overall nutritional profile, increase protein, increase fibre. We're seeing things such as a lot of acquisition, a bit of M&A activity, and Nestle recently through their health science business as well, now procuring a lot of those startup businesses.
And Georgie, are you seeing this or are you predicting you're going to see it?
So this is what is predicted and what we are seeing already. So whether that starts to ramp up.
Because we are seeing this in the US, but I haven't heard much buzz about this in Australia.
No,
and also, to be honest, where I'm living in Amsterdam in Europe, it's not yet embraced. It's not yet the topic of conversation, shall we say.
Yeah, and there's very much the same here. I think what activity we are seeing is still US-led, but we also need to understand that a large majority of the food industry in Australia are multinational players. We've got large Nestle footprint here, Kellogg footprint, Danone. So a lot of those global players who are already looking at this market from a US perspective also use Australia as an NPD or an innovation ground to launch new products. So I think we will start to see some of that flow on. But I guess what we're already seeing in the US is how are those food companies reshaping their products and their product portfolio to go after that GLP-1 drug user audience.
Okay, but these are companies that have made most of their money selling sugar, salt and fat. Right? It's not exactly consistent with our restructured future of food, and those don't match that well with GLP drugs, do they?
I'm not sure we're talking about restructuring the food system. Okay. We're talking a bit more about the economics. And it's an interesting one around, do we really see a reduction in what GLP-1 drug users are spending in their weekly shopping.
There is
and
some
their
recent
baskets.
data on that. Do any of the three of you have those studies?
I don't have stats, I've got anecdotal.
No, there's material drop-off. It's
Yeah.
something like a 25% reduction in sugary snack foods and a material reduction in alcohol consumption during the first 6 months, and that stays for the duration of the drug. But that they haven't got any data yet, as I understand it, on what happens after you go off the drug yet on that.
So I think that's key,
Where's
right?
Cyro? How is Cyro thinking about this?
Oh, well, I wouldn't say that Cyro is specifically thinking about this area yet. I think the key thing that you mentioned there is that there is a difference in terms of the consumption stat. So it's about reducing snacking foods, the salty foods, some of the sugar-containing foods, and it's moving towards those macronutrients, protein and fibre and else. But you asked us a provocative question at the start there about, should we be drugging to solve for this? What that drugging opportunity does is it actually opens up for that behavioural modification. And if you go to some of the other markets that we're more familiar with in Australia, say the gluten-free markets or the free-from markets, what happens is you've got an individual in that family who's consuming a particular type of food, so they've gone gluten-free, then the rest of the family actually ends up going towards that gluten-free market because it's easier than producing 3 meals or different meals for all of the family. So in that time when you've got that someone who's taking these medications, then what you'll start to see is the smaller portion size. You'll see the opportunity to change behaviours. There's a whole lot of other food systems pieces that Jack will probably speak on in this topic. But if yes, we don't want to I want it to be a fad because I want it to last a short time while the behavioural modifications occur, and then you're in a position to actually readjust what you're eating, how you're eating it, and so on. So I think that's the caveat to me saying yes.
It's all about the off-ramp, according to our panel. Okay, so what can we materially do to make that off-ramp a success, considering there's already been $160 billion spent in the US for, let's say, it could be having a material effect, but statistically the situation is getting worse, right? So let's assume it's 160 billion not well spent. What does an off-ramp look like that's going to make this a success?
Well, and it's more than that. I mean, that's just the diet market. We spend 1 to 2 trillion trying to make sick people less sick, and virtually nothing on keeping people healthy.
Yeah.
So I would say we also have another $1 trillion that we could devote to shifting that environment. And, that might be making fruits and vegetables wildly more affordable. And, it could be, there are lots of things we could do. You have that sort of window of opportunity where people might be willing to have policies that, encourage restaurants to not offer portion sizes where, it's 2 times the calories that a person should consume in a day. And, and I'm not trying to stigmatize companies that give you large portions, but, if you get 2 meals for the price of 1, that is good value. If you eat 2 meals for the price of 1, that is terrible value. So how do we encourage one versus the other? Yeah.
But at the moment here, I'm hearing 2 competing forces just even in the last 2 answers. So one is we need to get to more natural foods and affordable fruit and vegetable, and yet we're expecting effectively ultra-processed but high-density nutritious foods in order to not have loss in muscle mass when we've got a limited number of calories we're taking in here. So is this going to be a force for natural products, or is this going to be a force for more ultra-processed foods but more refined? Where are you sitting on that? Where's Cyro? How does Cyro feel about that? Michelle?
I'm not going to speak for the whole of Cyro, but
Well, you're the head of food and agriculture. Who else could?
Yeah. Look, I mean, you're right. It's contradictory, right? Because we want to have those, but there's also certain markets where we need to have those energy-dense foods, like I mentioned with healthy aging. So there's an opportunity there to reformulate for purpose, for health and healthfulness. But at the same time, diversity of food on our plates is what we're after here, and we have moved into a convenience market where we've got all those snacks available to us all the time, and so that's a part of the challenge. But we know that behavioural change is the hardest thing to affect. So that's we've got a whole range of different tools. You know, we've had the well-being diet, for instance, which has been really successful. But you know, it is a diet, it is a lifestyle change that you have to make, and that's what you've got to stick with.
God, please go
No, I
ahead,
was just
Georgie.
going to I think it depends, and I also think we're talking about very specific demographics. You know, I think the cost profile, the demographic of consumer that's taking these drugs is probably a smaller percentage of the population than the majority of the population that are accessing or should be or could be accessing.
Are you having a go at our early celebrity adopters here?
No, I'm just saying that, you know, affordability
just
is a
because
privilege.
it's over $1,000
Yes.
bucks a month doesn't mean that only the wealthy have been taking it, does it?
Well, I think we've seen that it would be a more higher income household
Look,
or
it is
higher
true
income
that at the moment
individual.
it's taken off as a celebrity thing.
So,
but
so what if? Okay, let's throw a what if scenario in here, because at the moment these are injectable mostly. There's some
Yep.
oral forms coming through,
Yep.
but these are injectable and they're not affordable for most.
Yep.
But you could imagine a scenario where agriculture could lean into this opportunity, and there's already things like fermentation, precision fermentation, as
Yep.
a means for producing not just one version of the drug, but multiple repeats of the drug in one protein that then is liberated and delivers a more efficacious dose. And you could use the sugar industry to fuel that production. So there's like opportunities there.
a natural version of the anti-obesity drugs.
But-
We're
and then
heading
going-
towards a non-injectable,
and going
organic. Okay.
Free from.
Going further, like put it in plants, put it in seeds, have those plants express them, right? There's
Yep.
opportunities there, but those sorts of technologies, if brought forward, would actually make these more affordable. And then we have to
Are they within
face
reach,
in-
Michelle, these type of changes?
Oh, the fermentation technology is already there. There's
Jack,
publications
we
there.
know that the non-injectable is very close, right? I mean, I think one of the major ones in testing just failed, but there's multiple in the pipeline. Jack?
But there are companies that are already working on natural
Yeah.
variants of these and hope to have them on the market relatively soon. I think the real question is going to be how efficacious are they?
Yep.
Because
Yep.
it's just
They
not
presently
the same.
don't have the density.
And
so it's
they
the
also
same active
aren't-
ingredient at about 1% of the content, in which case we could be left, yes, without the diarrhea and without the other problems, but also without the weight loss.
Yeah, well, and I think it will likely go the way of the supplements because they're
Yeah.
probably not going to spend $10 million to do clinical trials to prove it because people will just buy it because it's natural. And so, yeah.
Okay, well, let's just check how this is going to impact a few more stakeholders. So if one of you doesn't answer, I'll just give you the stakeholder, okay? Government first.
Quite significantly, I would say.
Beg your pardon?
Quite significantly.
And in what way? What's
I
the
think
action
we
that
gotta look at
governments
the-
have to take now?
Well, I think they're system-wide. If we're looking at PBS uptake in
Yep.
potentially this being, a deductible or government-subsidised drug,
Yep.
influence on policy, broader infrastructure, social healthcare, quite a significant impact. And I think our TGA and government now, we've seen them take action even last year, so quite significant for the government.
And we've done the consumer, we've done the CPG company. What about farmers? How is this going to change a farmer's world if we're talking about something that's going to have potentially the magnitude of change of climate change? What's going to change for the day-to-day world of a farmer in the crowd?
Well, I think the most immediate is there's going to be less demand for farm products, and there's a question of does that get exported or does it get not produced? And I don't know how that's going to play out, but I think that if you're it's a little different here, but in the United States, if you're producing corn and soy, those are two things that become ingredients into ultra-processed foods, and that's more likely to feel that impact of that. And so, that will shift demand in the same way that biofuels has an impact as well. If you have less demand for corn and soy, that will make meat less expensive in the same way that biofuels makes meat more expensive. And so, all of these are, it's a system. It's
Yep.
not, a single lever that you
We'll have a drag. There's been a wealth of recent data on the secondary health benefits. Are any of you following that? Michelle, do you know what I mean with that? In particular, I'm thinking of the Alzheimer's type impact, early data. Some of those secondary health benefits, well, metabolic, messing with our metabolism is inherently feels dangerous. Are you close to any of the secondary health findings at the moment, Michelle? Anything you want to chuck in there?
Well, Jack already mentioned the cardiovascular benefits, which,
Yep.
I think
Yep,
some of
I
those-
consider that primary at the
Yeah.
moment, simply because it's one of the goals of the Gen 1 drugs. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, there's been some very early stage preliminary research around anxiety, depression, and else. So, but I think it's too early to really know the impact.
Yep, okay, that's going to be a fascinating area. Certainly we've never had such a huge drug experiment in terms of 10% of the US population in less than 2 years.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a wealth of data in a magnitude that we've just not seen, I don't think, well, I don't work in the area of human medicine, but I'm not aware of things having that sort of adoption so quickly. I think that's a good spot there. Let's jump to this concept of, let's just do a quick yes, no. Should food be medicine? Jack?
No.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I'd go yes as well.
Okay, good. So Jack, you're in the minority again. Your co-panelists aren't exactly supporting you here today. but talk us through your theory on why food should be medicine.
Well, it's because right now we have a healthcare system that's all focused on medicine,
Yep.
which is really a sick care system.
Yep.
And so medicine is about making sick people less sick.
Yeah.
I think food is about keeping healthy people healthy. And I don't know why we want to adopt a model of food as medicine when medicine should want to adopt a model of, people keeping healthy people healthy. And so I guess I have a visceral reaction to this idea that, we want to think of our food in the same way as we think of medicine, because I personally would rather bring the joy back to food where we actually enjoy it.
That sounds
We're
like a
not trying
vote
to
of
medicate
no.
ourselves.
Food should not be medicine.
He's actually agreeing with us.
Yeah.
He just won't admit to agreeing with us.
Yeah, okay, so
Because-
everyone's agreeing. Look, if everyone's agreeing that our food shouldn't be classified as medicine, then unfortunately there's not much to drill in. Let's drill in on RFK. Now, what is going to happen in the US food system in terms of even ultra-processed foods, the role of these sort of drugs, with a major change at the top level of your
Health and Human
representative politician for food?
Well, others are welcome to jump in.
No, all of us, Jack.
Leave US
You're on your own
politics,
on this
yeah.
one, Jack. I'd be surprised if Michelle or Georgie can rescue you.
Yeah. I mean, clearly we don't know, because
Yeah.
you have different forces that are pulling in different directions. And, on one hand, the Make America Healthy, could be calling for fewer processed ingredients in food. On the other hand, it's calling for more whole foods in schools and some things that are sort of part of the liberal agenda and have been since Michelle Obama. But that's also going to have a big impact on the food companies that are other stakeholders in the current administration. And so I do think that if I was a food company, I would be following very closely these trends, because we just don't know how it's going to play out.
Yeah.
A lot of situations are uncertain, like you don't know what's going to happen, but eventually you get enough information to know. The current situation is not uncertain, it is volatile.
Yeah.
And what that means is that what we know tomorrow may not be true the day after tomorrow. And so that's part of why it's such a challenge. I had a conversation with a journalist a week ago, Friday, and talked about what I thought the future of USAID, the Agency for International Development, would be. And I ended with, but this assumes that they don't want to blow up the agency. And by Monday, we knew the answer to that question.
Yeah. No.
And so I don't think we yet know what the intent is to do with the food system,
Okay.
but we might by tomorrow.
Okay. It'll be changing every day if it's
Yeah.
anything like the first few days of the administration. By the way, it's a bit late to ask this question, but I don't know how to take questions from the audience. So if there is a way, and one of the facilitators over there want to help that happen, then please go ahead. Otherwise, I'll keep on going. I've got enough questions to take us through. But
I had
if
a
there is a
question for
way,
you,
then
Adam.
it'll be... No, there's not. Okay, fine.
I had a question for you. Would you invest in this? Yeah, that's your space. Where are you on it?
Where are we investing? That was my next topic for us. What's the role of the entrepreneur here?
Yeah.
I will sweep the gaps that you guys may or may not pick up, but at least throw us... I mean, we're at an agri-food tech conference. There are entrepreneurs and investors here. So throw out an idea of where an investor like me, a venture capital investor in the future of food, should deploy our capital in order to find the positives in this major trend. One each, and then I'll have a crack after that. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Sure.
Make it a good one, and you're not allowed to repeat something that the person before you said. You get to go first, Michelle, which is the easiest role.
Yeah, right. Though I actually love this question. So one of the things we have been doing is using the power of AI and looking at nature and then nature's ability to produce these types of molecules anyway. So the opportunity to actually harness AI now to explore and find molecules that have huge health benefits, whether it be weight management or diabetes management or other things like eco-friendly pesticides. Right, that's the opportunity that I think we've got, which is research. We heard not just research for research's sake this morning. It's about how do we develop those products that the industry needs, so that the farmers need, the growers, producers need, but using this type of science, this area of nature's already designed molecules, to then address some of the big challenges. So I've gone a bit tangential, but
I
that's
like
where
it.
I'm at.
But I think it's interesting that you labelled this as one of, it's a receptor in our stomach, in our brain. So to that extent, it's natural. But intuitively, I don't think it is injectable as a natural product. But okay, I like where you're going.
Well, if you wanted to, you could really, you could purify it out of a human. It'd just take a lot of humans, and I don't think that'd be ethically okay.
Georgie, where should I be putting my dollars if I want to chase this particular runaway
I'm probably
train?
at the other end of the supply chain to Michelle in that regard, but bioactive compounds, how do we look at the extraction of those, which I think is taking it through when we've produced food, and particularly, we're looking at some stuff around the horticulture sector of actually powderising or extracting those nutritional profiles out of, naturally produced fruit and veg, and putting those through to pharmaceutical sector or into that nutraceutical space and supplement space. And I think we'd see Australia as an area where there's a significant amount of underinvestment in that sort of manufacturing capability.
So just to understand, this was about mimicking the drug with a natural product. You're saying, let's just jump straight to the superfoods where Australia will lead, and therefore you get a better loaded, more nutritious, lower calorie diet.
And you are precision in how you extract those
and you
very
don't have the muscle
specific compounds.
degradation.
Exactly.
Jack, bring us home with a cracker. Bring us home with something that everyone's going to rush out and immediately invest in.
Well, I wouldn't spend that much on R&D because it's going to just take too long and to build these facilities. And so I would just create a brand that was focused on slowing the food in the digestion in the body, and that would be ready for these drugs when they get here. But I would try to create a brand, create an establishment in the market, and then be ready so that by the time these products came and people started looking for products that checked these boxes, I already had a brand in the market that could then be bought up by Unilever or Nestle or somebody else, and then we could retire.
Very good.
We can talk after this.
In that case, I'll cover the category that you didn't mention, which is an important opportunity with the on-ramp and the off-ramp, is actually digital tools to help us look at what we're doing with our diet and our day-to-day activities. And it's the next generation of what we've seen with fitness apps, because now we have new science becoming available in a world where AI is allowing better access to data pools, but also in a chance to have a different set of instructions, because this is quite a prescriptive it's quite a detailed procedure you should follow if you want to lose the weight, permanently change your behaviour, and also not accidentally consume all your muscle, right? So that's where I'll chuck in some technology, because you threw out the challenge. And we are actually out of time, so I'd like to thank you very much. It's a unique panel to have commercial science from Australia and then a leader in food systems who's come in from the US to actually share the knowledge. I think we got to the conclusion, actually, although some people, a couple of our panellists were sitting on the fence of whether this is a fad, I think we can conclude that there's going to be an element of force in here, even though it may not be as big an impact as climate change. We can expect superfoods, we can expect alternatives to these drugs, we can expect new branded foods, and we can also expect a material reduction in overall food consumption as a result of these drugs. We can expect some pretty hefty side effects, and messing with metabolism is going to have consequences. But if there's going to be a behavioural change, we are going to see a food system change, which will be good for nature and good for our food system, even though ethically, I at least violently dislike the idea of drugging our way out of this problem. So thank you very much, panel, and thanks very much for sticking through, audience.
Thank you.